Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I want you to hear me today. I want you to listen close because this message is for you. It's for every person in this room struggling, striving, wondering if anyone's out there listening to the silent cries of your heart. Let me tell you something. God hears your heart. You may not see it, you may not feel it in every moment, but I promise you, He is listening. Life ain't always easy. We all go through battles. Some of us fight in silence, hiding the pain, the doubts, the dreams that seem so far out of reach. Maybe you're feeling tired. Maybe you're tired of fighting, tired of praying, tired of hoping. You feel like you've been shouting into the void and nothing's changing. But listen, just because you don't see the results right away doesn't mean the work isn't being done. God hears you. He hears the whispers of your soul, the cries of your heart. He hears it all. Don't let the world make you think you have to scream to be heard. You don't need to shout from the rooftops. No, your heart speaks louder than that. God knows your heart's language. Every tear, every thought, every fear, you don't have to explain it. He already knows. And this is what I need you to remember: you are never alone. You've got someone in your corner who never turns his back. When you feel forgotten, when the weight of the world is on your shoulders, He's listening. He's working even when you can't see it, even when you can't feel it. Sometimes the greatest blessing is not in what you receive, but in knowing that He's got your back, He's got a plan, and He's guiding you even through the toughest times. So hold your head up high. I don't care what you're going through. I don't care what you faced, what you've lost, or what you're still fighting for. If you trust, if you believe, if you keep moving forward, you're going to make it. You will rise up. You will conquer because God hears your heart. And when you stand firm in faith, when you stand strong in the belief that He is working things out for you, you are unstoppable. Your journey, your struggle, it is not in vain. So don't give up. Don't quit. Because your heart is being heard, and God's got a plan that's bigger than you can imagine. Keep going, keep believing you're going to make it because God hears your heart, and His timing is always perfect. When we face moments of struggle, it often feels like the world is not listening. We shout, we pray, we beg for change, yet it feels as if our cries are lost in the silence. It's easy to feel overlooked, to feel like we're shouting into an empty space. But here's the truth: even when we think no one hears us, God is always listening to the deepest, quietest cries of our hearts. Sometimes we don't even have the words to express our pain, our doubts, or our hopes. Words fail us in the midst of our struggles, and we wonder if anyone can understand what we're going through. But what we need to remember is that God doesn't need us to articulate everything perfectly. He understands the language of the heart. In fact, the times when you feel you have no voice, when you're exhausted and drained from trying to hold it all together, that's when your heart speaks the loudest. God isn't distant. He isn't disconnected from our emotions or our experiences. He knows every tear that falls, every moment of frustration, every hidden ache we carry deep within. He knows the fears we don't even know how to name. And more than that, He hears our hearts in ways that go beyond the spoken word. He hears our pain, our joy, our longing, and our gratitude, everything we hold inside, even the things we can't put into words. We live in a world that's obsessed with speed and noise. We are constantly bombarded with information and distractions, and in the midst of it all, it's easy to feel insignificant, as if we're just another voice in the crowd. But God doesn't measure value by volume. He doesn't need you to be loud to be heard. His love is unconditional, and His attention is not divided. He listens to you with the same intensity whether you speak in a whisper, whether you shout, or whether you stay silent. The stillness of your heart is never overlooked. God's listening is not like the listening we experience with people. Too often we are distracted, preoccupied, or overwhelmed by our own concerns to fully hear and understand someone else's pain. But God's listening is perfect. His attention is unwavering, and He hears you with a depth that no human could ever match. When you feel like you're in a room full of people but still alone in your suffering, remember that God sees you. He hears you. Your pain does not go unnoticed. Moreover, God's listening is not passive. He is not simply hearing your cries from a distance, indifferent to your plight. He is active, He is involved, and He is moving in your life even when you can't see it. Just because things aren't changing the way you expect doesn't mean that God isn't at work. Sometimes the answers we seek take time to unfold, and sometimes the most powerful answers are the ones we don't immediately recognize. But in every moment, God is present. He hears you and He is working on your behalf in ways you cannot always understand in the moment. The next time you find yourself feeling unheard or overlooked, remember that God is listening. Your voice is never lost in the noise of the world. Even in the quietest of moments, even in your deepest pain, God hears the cries of your heart, and He will never ignore you. He is with you, always listening closely, understanding fully, and working tirelessly on your behalf. There are times in life when it feels like the world is against you. When the weight of your struggles becomes so heavy, it's hard to carry on. You find yourself in the midst of turmoil, facing challenges you feel are insurmountable. And in those moments when you're pushing through, striving, fighting with everything in you, it's easy to feel like your voice isn't being heard. You cry out in frustration, in pain, in hope, but somehow it seems as if no one is listening. And yet, I need you to understand one crucial thing: God hears your heart. In those quiet moments of desperation, when you feel alone, when you feel like no one sees the depth of your pain or the weight of your worry, it is essential to remember that God is always listening. Not just to your words, but to the unspoken cries that come from the very core of your being. Sometimes words are not enough to express what we are feeling. Sometimes we don't even know how to articulate the depths of our heart. But God, in His infinite understanding and compassion, hears every thought, every tear, every sigh that passes through your spirit. He understands you in ways that no one else can. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that only vocal, visible cries matter, that only those who shout loud enough will be heard. But God's listening is not bound by volume or intensity. He doesn't need you to scream in order to hear you. He hears your heart even when you feel like you're too exhausted to speak. Your silent prayers, your deepest hopes, your quietest fears, He hears it all. You don't need to make noise for Him to know you. You don't need to be in a place of strength or certainty to be heard. It is precisely in your vulnerability, in your weakness, when you feel the most invisible, that He is closest. God is not just hearing you, He is deeply attuned to your soul. Every moment of joy, every moment of sorrow, every small triumph, every overwhelming defeat, He feels it with you. This is the difference between God's listening and the listening we experience with others. Often when people hear us, they hear only what we say, but God listens to what we don't say. He listens to our hearts, to the things we might not have the courage to express, the things that weigh us down and keep us up at night. God hears every cry, every prayer, and every longing, even if we can't put it into words. You see, God's listening is not passive. When He hears your heart, He is not distant or disengaged. His ears bent towards you, and His heart is with you in every moment. Sometimes it may seem like nothing is changing, like the answer you're waiting for has not come yet, but know that God is at work in ways you cannot see. He is moving behind the scenes, aligning things in your life, preparing you for what's next, even when it feels like you're standing still. He knows your heart's desires, He knows your needs, and He is working things out in His perfect timing. There will be moments when you doubt, moments when you feel like the world is spinning out of control, and it's easy to wonder if anyone is listening. But in those moments, remember that God's attention is never divided. You are never too small, too insignificant, or too broken for Him total care. His love is constant, and His ears are always open to hear the deepest cries of your heart. There are times when we find ourselves in situations that seem impossible to navigate. Life can be overwhelming, and we can feel like we're standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter in sight. We pray, we plead, we ask for help, but it feels as though our words get lost in the air, unheard by anyone. It's during these times that we can start to wonder if anyone is truly listening. And perhaps more poignantly, we may begin to question if God is really hearing us. We may doubt that He's listening to our prayers or taking notice of our struggles, but the truth is, God hears your heart in ways that go beyond words. He listens to the quiet whispers of your soul, the silent tears that fall when you feel too weak to speak, and the deepest cries that cannot be captured by language. When you think you're alone in your pain, when the world feels cold and distant, know this: God hears you. Even when your voice falters and your faith wavers, He knows the cries that come from the core of who you are. It's easy to assume that the only prayers that matter are the loud, bold ones, the ones spoken with confidence and certainty. But that's not how God operates. God hears your heart in every moment, in every circumstance, even when you have nothing left to give. It doesn't matter if your prayers are perfect or eloquent, if your words fall short, or if your faith feels fragile. What matters is that He knows your heart, and He listens with a love that is steadfast and unconditional. Sometimes, in the midst of our pain, we become so consumed with the idea that we have to do something or say something to be heard. We feel like we have to prove our worthiness, like we have to work harder or be stronger in order to get God's attention. But God's attention is never something we have to earn. He is always there, always present, always attentive to the cries of our hearts. His love for you is not based on your ability to speak perfectly or your strength to endure. His love is not conditional upon your performance. He hears you because He loves you. And this love is not determined by anything you can do or say. It's simply who He is. When we are weak, when we are broken, when we are uncertain, we can find comfort in knowing that God is listening in those very moments. Even when we don't have the words to express the depth of our pain or our joy, He understands. In fact, there are times when we are so overwhelmed by life that words fail us altogether. But God does not require us to speak in order to hear us. His understanding goes beyond language and beyond what we can put into words. He sees our heart and He knows exactly what we are going through. In those moments when we are too exhausted to pray, too weary to fight, God is there. He is listening, He is moving, and He is working on our behalf. It can be hard to trust in this, especially when things seem to be going wrong, when it feels like everything is falling apart. But the truth is that God's timing is not our timing, and His ways are higher than ours. Just because we don't see immediate answers doesn't mean God isn't at work. The answers to our prayers may not come in the form we expect or at the speed we want, but that doesn't mean they're not coming. God's response to our hearts is always perfect. Even when we can't see it, He is orchestrating things in our favor, and He will always listen with compassion and grace. When life becomes difficult and the weight of the world feels too heavy, remember that you are not alone. Your heart is heard. Even in the quietest, most intimate moments, God hears you. He knows your deepest struggles, your greatest fears, and your most secret hopes. And He is always listening, always attentive, and always working on your behalf. In the quietest of moments, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to carry, it's easy to feel like no one is listening. You speak, you pray, you cry out in hope, but still, it can feel as though your voice is lost, unheard, swallowed by the vastness of the world. But hear me when I say this: God hears your heart. He hears you even in those moments when you have no words left to say. When you feel exhausted, drained, and overwhelmed by life's struggles, God is listening to the very core of your being, the cries of your heart that can't always be expressed in words. Life has a way of wearing us down. The demands, the challenges, the unexpected turns we have to take, they all add up and can leave us feeling isolated. We begin to wonder if anyone truly understands what we're going through. People may listen, but they don't always understand the depth of our pain or the intricacies of our struggles. It's easy to feel as though no one truly sees us, no one truly knows the battle we're facing. But God sees, God knows. He is the one who understands in ways that no one else can. And what's more, He listens not just to the words we say, but to the things we can't express, to the feelings and thoughts we can't put into language. God doesn't require us to be perfect or strong to be heard. In fact, it's often when we are at our lowest, when our strength is gone and our words fail, that God is closest to us. In those moments when we feel as though we have nothing left to give, God still listens. His love for us is not conditional upon our ability to speak clearly or pray with confidence. He hears our hearts even when they are broken or full of doubt. His understanding transcends the limitations of human language. You don't have to be articulate. You don't have to have everything together. God understands your heart in ways you can't even begin to comprehend. In the midst of life's challenges, it's important to remember that God's listening isn't passive. He is not simply observing from a distance, detached from your pain. No, He is deeply involved in every moment of your life, walking alongside you even when it feels like you're walking alone. His ear is always tuned to your cries, your sighs, and your silent prayers. You may not see it, but He is working on your behalf. Even when the answers seem delayed, even when you can't see a way forward, God is always moving in your favor. Sometimes the answers to our prayers come in ways that we don't expect or in timing that we don't understand, but know that His responses are always perfect. His timing is always right. There will be moments in life when you question if anyone is listening, when the weight of your struggles becomes so heavy that you wonder if anyone sees the pain behind your smile. It's in those moments, in the darkest times, when God is closest. He sees you, He hears you, and He is always working for your good. His love for you does not depend on your ability to make your voice heard or to make sense of your struggles. He hears your heart, and that is enough. He knows the depths of your pain, the struggles you face, the dreams you hold in your heart. And while the world may not always hear your cries, He does. His love for you is constant, and He will never turn away from you. In every season of life, whether in moments of joy or in the darkest hours, God is listening. He hears your heart, and He will always be there, no matter what you face. Even when you feel like your voice is lost in the crowd, even when you feel like your prayers go unanswered, God is attentive to every word, every thought, every longing. You are never alone. He hears you. There are moments in life when you feel as if the weight of the world is pressing down on you, when the burden of your struggle seems unbearable, and when you wonder if anyone is truly listening. You might cry out in desperation, asking for help, but the silence that follows makes you question if your cries are heard at all. You feel alone, misunderstood, and insignificant in the face of all the challenges you face. But in those moments when you feel like no one is listening, when the world seems indifferent to your pain, it's important to remember one undeniable truth: God hears your heart. The truth is, God is not just listening to your words, He is listening to your heart, to the deepest part of your soul. It's not always about how well you can articulate your pain, your desires, or your struggles. Sometimes words fail us. Sometimes we are too exhausted or overwhelmed to pray the way we think we should, and that's when God hears us the most. You don't need to have the perfect words, the perfect faith, or the perfect prayer to be heard by God. He knows you. He knows your heart better than you know yourself, and He is always attuned to the cries that come from within, even when you cannot find the words to express them. Often, we believe that the only way to be heard is by being loud, by making a scene, or by speaking in the most powerful and convincing way. We live in a world that values loud voices and bold actions, and it can feel like if we're not loud enough, we're invisible. But with God, it's not about volume or eloquence. It's about sincerity and trust. He hears the whispered prayers, the silent pleas, and even the unspoken longings that reside in the deepest parts of your heart. God listens not only to your words, but also to your silence. He knows what you need before you even ask. Sometimes the struggle isn't just in the words we say or the things we think we should pray for. It's in the waiting. It's in the moments when nothing seems to change, when your circumstances remain the same, and the answers you seek don't seem to come. It's in those times when it feels like your prayers are unanswered that you need to trust that God is still listening and He is still working on your behalf. The answers may not come on your timetable and they may not come in the way you expect, but rest assured that God is at work behind the scenes. He is listening to your heart, even when it feels like nothing is happening. His timing is always perfect, even if we don't understand it in the moment. When you're facing hardships, it's easy to get caught up in the feeling that you're fighting alone, that no one truly sees the struggle you're enduring. But God does. He sees every tear, every sleepless night, every doubt that creeps into your mind. He sees your heart even when others can't. And He is always by your side, offering strength when you feel weak, peace when you feel overwhelmed, and guidance when you feel lost. His love for you is not conditional on your ability to handle life's challenges. He loves you in your brokenness, in your vulnerability, in your weakness. In fact, it is often in these moments that God is closest to you, offering you His unconditional love and grace. You are never alone in your journey. Even when you feel like no one else understands, even when the world seems too loud, too busy, or too indifferent, God is there. He is listening to your heart, and He is responding with love, wisdom, and care. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He doesn't need you to have it all together. He just needs you to trust that He is listening, that He knows your heart, and that He will never leave you. When you find yourself feeling unheard or unnoticed, take comfort in knowing that God hears you. He always has, and He always will.